All right, my friends, welcome to Antiwar Radio, Chaos 92.7 FM in Austin, Texas. I'm your host, Scott Horton. Please check out the website, antiwar.com, antiwar.com/radio. We're going to get right to it today with our first guest. It's, the best Western reporter, if not the best reporter in Iraq, the Middle East correspondent for the London Independent, Patrick Cockburn. Welcome back to the show, Patrick.
Thank you.
It's very good to have you on the show today. And I want to mention also to the audience, Patrick is the author of the new book, Muqtada al-Sadr, the Shia revival and the struggle for Iraq. And he broke two very important stories last week for the Independent, last Thursday, the 5th of June, and Friday, the 6th of June, 2008 here. The first one is called Revealed, Secret Plan to Keep Iraq Under U.S. Control, and the follow-up, U.S. Issues Threat to Iraq's $50 billion foreign reserves in military deal. And Patrick, I guess the first thing I notice here is a lot of people in the Iraqi government are coming to you and trying to get this story out, huh?
Yes, I mean, there were a lot of a number of Iraqis who thought the only way that this could be stopped or modified would be to reveal what was happening. Otherwise, the U.S. negotiators were very keen to keep it secret.
And now, we've known that they have this thing they call the strategic alliance or something that they're trying to work, but what you've revealed here are the actual terms of the deal.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I should explain it's just called the Strategic Alliance or the Status of Forces Agreement, primarily not to call it a treaty between Iraq and the U.S. Mm-hmm. So that's exactly what it is, and it'll determine the relations between the two countries for the future. The reason that the administration doesn't want to do this is pretty clearly that they don't want to have to submit it to Congress. They don't want to put it before the Senate.
Right, they'd need 2/3, a supermajority in the Senate if it's a treaty, but only 50%, or maybe not even that, I guess. They can just do it by executive fiat.
They do it by executive fiat, though in reality, this is really one of the most important treaties ever signed by the United States.
And now, the brass tacks here, it's funny, we talked for years about plans for 14 permanent military bases. They're telling you 50.
The figure is 58, in fact. It's emerged from other reporters, and since I read that piece, other reporters in Baghdad have got the exact figure. It's 58 U.S. bases.
Unbelievable.
Well, there are about 30 really big U.S. bases in Iraq, so it's more than that. It includes various so-called forward operating bases, small combat bases.
In other words, they don't plan on closing a single one ever.
Yeah, I mean, I'm basically, with the 30 big bases, it's very simple. The U.S. dominates Iraq, You wouldn't even need that number. It may be that they said 58. Maybe they were prepared to, they are prepared to make some cosmetic compromises. So, they couldn't say, well, we'll reduce it to 24 or 30. It wouldn't make any much difference to the degree of U.S. authority. But it might allow the Iraqi government to say, we've extracted concessions, then sign the treaty.
Sounds like perhaps why they made it such a high number in the first place, just so they could come down a little bit for PR purposes later.
Could well be, yeah.
And now the other conditions that you cite in your article of this treaty, let's call it what it is, this treaty, is that the American military will still be able to conduct military operations inside Iraq at will, arrest Iraqis, and retain immunity for any criminal actions they may commit, and that includes the contractors too, huh?
There's some suggestion the last 24 hours that they might not demand immunity for the contractors, but that's almost impossible to do, because you have to realize how dependent the U.S. Army in Iraq is on these contractors these days, both as sort of highly, heavily armed, what are effectively mercenary troops, but also sort of humble support staff. I mean, the people who, do the cooking and clean out the latrines and so forth. So it would be very difficult for the U.S. forces there to have immunity for people who are officially in the army and no immunity for those who are unofficially in the army, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Well, Patrick, it sounds to me like this basically is just another piece of paper enshrining the exact situation we have now. It doesn't sound like this changes anything for the long-term future.
Yeah, I mean, it prolongs, it basically is a continuation of the U.S. military occupation of Iraq, whichever way. The Iraqi government, will want to describe it as something different, and Ryan Crocker, the U.S. ambassador to Baghdad, sort of denounced my article by name, saying it's not permanent bases. But this is really just a PR. They might, in theory, be tenants of the Iraqi government, i.e. they pay them a few $100s for the base, or there might be a string of barbed wire outside a base with thousands of U.S. soldiers inside, a string of barbed wire with a few Iraqi policemen in sentry box, and then they'd say, well, the Iraqis are in charge of security, so it's not a U.S. base. But this is a flim-flam. Basically, the bases would be wholly U.S. controlled, and these bases would wholly control Iraq.
It seems pretty shocking to see Nouri al-Maliki, the prime minister of Iraq, coming right out and denouncing this, basically, right there on the front page. What's up with that? Isn't he our guy?
They know this is very unpopular, what's happening, and they're very keen. The U.S. is very keen not to have a referendum in Iraq on this treaty. Maliki, I think, doesn't much like it, but doesn't believe he can survive without U.S. support. Therefore, he needs to be seen to be opposing the treaty. Then he will announce that, we've removed the worst parts of this, and now I'll sign. We've fought a heroic battle for Iraq against the U.S. to bring bases under Iraqi control, and then they'll sign. But at the end of the day, I think the degree of U.S. control could well be, what they're demanding. And there's no doubt that President Bush wants this done by 31st of July. He's putting on a lot of personal pressure.
Now, we've talked before about the relationship between the Supreme Islamic Council and the Dawa Party with Iran, and, of course, their dependence on the United States as well. Are they simply the cat's paws of the Tehran regime, or is Maliki and Abdulaziz al-Hakim and these guys just basically stuck between the United States and Iran here?
They're sort of stuck, maybe. They're obviously primarily dependent on the U.S. because, their army is dependent on the U.S. Forces there. They say this publicly. The political origin of these people is mostly in Iran. The Supreme Council of Islamic Revolution in Iraq, they've changed that to a slightly different name recently, but was founded not only in Iran in 1982, but really by the Iranian Revolutionary Guards. They needed, at that time, they thought they might defeat Saddam Hussein in the Iran-Iraq War, and they needed to put an Iraqi face on their occupation. So this was an Iranian creation. But exactly what their links are to Iran now is a bit unclear. What is noticeable is that some of the Iraqi politicians who've been most against this treaty within the governing parties tend to belong to a badder organization. The Supreme Council, the paramilitary wing, tend to be those with quite close relations with Iran.
Mm-hmm. And you do say that Abdulaziz al-Hakim has basically seemingly conceded to this. Is that right?
Yeah, it looks that way. Again, the presence of the Iraqi coalition ruling in Baghdad seems convinced that it couldn't survive without United States backing. Mm-hmm. And probably they're right. They don't want to test this. They don't want a referendum on this constitution. And they're also facing elections at the end of this year and next year, which, unless they can fix them, they'll probably do badly in. So they're looking at those elections too.
Now, Rafsanjani, who's known as, I guess, a moderate in Iran, has denounced this, right?
Yeah, he denounced it, said, that the treaty basically would make Iraq a slave state of the U.S., a client state of the U.S. It's kind of telling that all the Iranian sort of senior leaders, including those considered moderate, have been fiercely denouncing this treaty. It's clearly taken very seriously in Tehran as establishing, if it goes through, Iraq as a sort of long-term platform for a war against Iran. So they're very keen to modify it. And there's some talk of contacts between the U.S. and Iran over this, but I don't know how serious those are.